The problem, Nora decided as she entered the council chamber, was not that her wolf had opinions. All wolves had opinions. The problem was that her wolf had opinions, a flair for territorial drama, and absolutely no interest in listening to hers. The room smelled like her. Not her perfume, a subtle sandalwood she'd chosen specifically because it was the opposite of confrontational. Her scent, the real one. Charred cedar and petrichor, the deep iron-blood signature that she'd spent a lifetime learning to bank to almost nothing, was now draped over every surface in the king's council chamber, like a flag somebody had forgotten to take down after an invasion. Her wolf stirred in the back of her mind, took stock of its handiwork, and offered a single, flat observation. "Well, I appear to have done that again." "You appear to have done that again," Nora agreed, keeping her face perfectly neutral as she crossed the room. "You've marked the king's chair." "Yes, and the table, apparently, and the water pitcher." A pause. "The water pitcher is new. I don't remember the water pitcher." A longer pause. "In my defense, it's very silver. Reflective surfaces are provocative. Reflective surfaces are not provocative. They're surfaces." Agree to disagree. 6 weeks. She had been mated to Sky Wolfblood, alpha king of the Silver Moon packs, for 6 weeks, and in that time her legendary nose, the nose that could track a single wolf through a 3-day-old rainstorm, the nose that had made her the most feared tracker the Ironblood had produced in a generation, had become a traitor. It wasn't tracking anymore. It was broadcasting. Every surface Sky touched, every space he occupied, every object that carried even a whisper of his warm stone and summer earth scent became, in her wolf's estimation, something that needed correcting, claiming, wallpapering with her presence until nobody in a 5-mile radius could possibly mistake whose mate the Alpha King was. The worst part was, her wolf seemed as confused by it as she was. This wasn't enthusiasm. It wasn't conquest. It was compulsion. A territorial surge that neither of them had asked for, and her wolf was handling it with the quiet, resigned horror of someone who keeps sneezing in a library and can't stop. She took her seat to the king's right. The chair already smelled like her. The chair had smelled like her for 3 weeks. "That one wasn't me," her wolf said. "That one's just soaked in at this point. Natural consequences." Sky leaned toward her. He smelled like summer earth and warm stone, and underneath that, faintly but unmistakably, like her. Like charred cedar, like rain on hot ground. The Alpha King of the Silver Moon packs smelled like he'd been sleeping in a forest fire, and it was entirely Nora's fault. "Morning," he said. His voice was low, his eyes were on her, had been on her since she walked in. He seemed to realize this at the same moment she did, because he looked down at his papers with a studied casualness that fooled absolutely nobody. His hand, which had been resting on his armrest, drifted to the armrest closest to her, his fingers settling about 2 inches from hers. Not touching, just nearby. He didn't notice he'd done it. He never noticed. His wolf just moved him like furniture, sliding him incrementally closer to her every time they were in the same room. And the man himself would look up 20 minutes later and find he'd migrated 6 feet to the left for no apparent reason. "Sleep well?" he asked his papers. "My wolf scent marked the wash basin while I was brushing my teeth. She seemed startled by it, so we're both having a morning." A muscle twitched at the corner of his mouth. He was trying very hard not to smile. He failed. "I like the wash basin. It suits you." "Nothing about this suits me." The smile broke through, warm and crooked. It did something to his face that made him look less like a king and more like a man who'd just heard the best news of his day. His wolf had steered his hand another inch closer. His thumb was almost touching her little finger. "He's doing it again," her wolf observed. "The gravitational drift. You'd think he'd have noticed by now. He hasn't. Men." Lord Valerius, the ancient head of the Elder Council, cleared his throat with the enthusiasm of someone extracting a hairball. "Your Majesty, the matter of the Sunstone Ridge patrol routes." "Of course." Sky straightened, all monarch now. But as he reached for the silver pitcher to pour his water, his fingers brushed the handle, and a fresh wave of Nora's scent, charred cedar and petrichor, sharp and deep and unmistakably possessive, bloomed off the metal like a flare. Every wolf in the room tensed, their own wolves reacting to the sudden, potent reminder that the Ironblood Alpha had staked a claim on everything within arm's reach of their king. "I truly did not mean to do that," her wolf said, sounding genuinely perplexed. "I was just sitting here. That was residual." Nora wanted to dissolve. She kept her expression perfectly still and said, "The patrol routes, Marcus." Marcus Thorne, Sky's beta, slid a map across the table. He placed it carefully on a neutral section of oak, avoiding the zones of maximum scent contamination, like a man navigating a minefield. His own mate, a sweet she-wolf named Greta, had reportedly made him sleep in the garden shed last week, after he'd come home smelling so strongly of Nora's territorial markers that Greta's wolf had assumed he was having an affair with a forest. "The Granite Peak Pack has been pushing their southern patrols 2 miles past the agreed line," Marcus said, "near the White Bridge Pass." Nora leaned forward. "That pass is the only viable corridor through the mountains until spring thaw. If they control it, they control trade access to the entire Eastern Valley." The strategic assessment came automatically, her mind slotting the information into place like a lock accepting a key. This was what she was good at. This was what she'd been, before the bond, before the scent, before the mortifying reality of being an alpha who couldn't stop marking the furniture. She was a tracker. She read the ground, the scent, the movement of things, and she saw the pattern underneath. Valerius gave her a thin look. "The Ironblood Alpha is correct." "She has a name," Sky said, his tone mild. He didn't look up from the map, but the temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees. "And she's made the only useful observation in the last 10 minutes, so perhaps we might direct our attention to her analysis rather than her title." Nora felt the faint warmth of his regard like a hand on the small of her back. And then she felt her wolf, inspired by the moment, deposit a fresh layer of scent on the chair. Silently, shamelessly, without her permission. "Sorry," her wolf said, not sounding sorry at all. "Reflexive. He defended us. That triggers things." "What things?" "Territorial things. I don't make the rules." "You are literally making the rules. You are the only one making rules here." "Well, yes, but I'm not enjoying it." Nora doubted that very much. The incidents escalated with the steady inevitability of weather. Marcus called it the scent marking era, and his tone when he said it suggested he was counting the days until it was over. The ceremonial crown was first. Sky reached for it during a formal audience, and Nora, standing 20 feet away doing absolutely nothing, felt the telltale tingle as her wolf extended its reach and deposited a fresh, unmistakable layer of charred cedar on the silver circlet. The guards flanking the throne stiffened. The visiting delegation from the Eastern Packs exchanged uneasy glances. Sky placed the crown on his head, paused, and sniffed. "Lovely," he said, to no one in particular. "That one I'm claiming," her wolf said. "The crown is important. The crown should smell right. The crown should smell like the king." "It does. It smells like the king's mate. Which is better." Then the training yard. Sky sparring with the royal guard, his practice sword ringing against shields that, by the end of the session, all carried a faint but persistent undertone of Nora's scent. The captain, a stoic giant named Boris, formally requested new shields. Sky denied it, grinning. But the scent marking wasn't only going in one direction. Sky's wolf was conducting its own quiet campaign, and it was doing it without his knowledge or consent. It started small, his chair migrating toward hers in council meetings, an inch one day, 2 the next, until Marcus pointed out that the king's chair was now essentially touching the queen's, and the rest of the council was sitting 6 feet away on the other side of a very wide table. "I didn't move it," Sky said, baffled, staring at the gap. "You moved it every morning for a week," Marcus said wearily. "I watched you do it. You picked it up, moved it, sat down, and opened your papers like nothing had happened." Then it was the morning he'd spent 10 minutes of a formal audience with his hand resting on the back of Nora's chair, his thumb making small circles on the carved wood, while he delivered a speech about grain tariffs. The entire court had watched his hand instead of his face. He had no idea he'd done it until Marcus told him afterward. "Did I really?" Skye asked, a faint flush rising on his neck. "For 10 minutes, Your Majesty." The ambassador from the river packs appeared to find it very moving. The worst was the morning Nora had been reviewing maps in the library, and Skye had walked in, crossed the room without looking up from the dispatch he was reading, sat down in the chair directly beside hers, not the one across the table, not the one by the window, the one 6 inches from her elbow, and continued reading as if he'd made a deliberate choice. He hadn't. He looked up 5 minutes later, saw how close he was, and startled like a man who'd sleepwalked into a stranger's house. "How did I get here?" he asked. "You walked, in a straight line, like a homing pigeon." The flush again. "My wolf has no subtlety." "Your wolf has excellent subtlety. It got you here without you noticing. That's the opposite of unsubtle. It's sneaky." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, then opened it again. "Would you like me to move?" "Did I say that?" He didn't move. His wolf is efficient, at least, Nora's wolf observed. No unnecessary scent marking, just physical proximity achieved through stealth. I respect the methodology, if not the transparency. But it was the Lord Ashworth incident that changed her thinking entirely. Skye told her about it over dinner, with the particular gleam of a man who had discovered a new and wonderful toy. Ashworth came in demanding sole logging rights to the Whisperwood. His family's been trying to get their hands on it for 30 years. Skye leaned back, a glass of wine in hand. Outrageous request. Normally takes an hour of diplomatic fencing to get him to back down. And I happen to be holding the quill you marked yesterday, the good one, the one that smells like a cedar forest after a thunderstorm. He grinned. I just rolled it between my fingers while he talked, slowly. He started sweating about 3 minutes in, cut his demand by half at the 5-minute mark, withdrew the whole thing when I tapped the quill on his petition. Nora stared at him. "You weaponized my scent." "I utilized a naturally occurring strategic asset," he corrected, looking enormously pleased with himself. "You used my out-of-control wolf as a negotiating tool. And it worked beautifully. 0 concessions, 0 raised voices, just a very nervous lord and a very fragrant quill." She was caught between outrage and a grudging admiration that she did not want to feel. It was, she had to admit, a move worthy of an Ironblood. "He's not wrong," her wolf said, sounding almost impressed. "Inefficient distribution of territorial markers has been my primary concern. If he's found a way to direct them toward strategic objectives, that's actually not terrible." "Don't encourage him." "I'm not encouraging. I'm observing. There's a difference. A small one, admittedly." Nora spent that afternoon in the library, searching ancient texts for anything about bond surges between 2 alphas. She found exactly nothing useful. Every text assumed the female partner would be submissive, yielding, a soothing presence to temper the male alpha's aggression. One book suggested she soften her spirit with gentle contemplation and the quiet arts. Her wolf read over her shoulder, metaphorically speaking. "Gentle contemplation," it repeated, deadpan. "Yes, that's us. Very gentle, very contemplative." "We sent Mark a battle shield this morning from across a courtyard." "This is useless," Nora said aloud, closing the book. "It was useless when it was written. The problem is that nobody's ever been us before. 2 alphas. The books don't know what to do with us because it hasn't happened." For once, her wolf wasn't being sardonic. There was something almost gentle in the observation. And it landed because it was true. There was no map for this. She was the best tracker in a generation, and she was walking blind. But the moment that really shook her came not from the scent marking, but from a quiet conversation with Marcus's mate, Greta, the baker's daughter. Sweet, practical, devastatingly honest. They were in the kitchen, neutral territory, or as neutral as anywhere in the castle could be, with Nora's scent drifting through it like weather. Greta was kneading bread, Nora was drinking tea, and trying to occupy as little olfactory space as possible. Can I ask you something? Greta said, not looking up from her dough. And you won't bite my head off? I don't bite heads off. Greta raised an eyebrow. I don't bite heads off unprovoked, Nora amended. Does it bother you that people have stopped calling you the Iron Blood Tracker? Nora's teacup paused halfway to her lips. What do they call me? The King's Mate. Greta said it gently, like she knew it would land. That's what you are now to most of them. Not the Tracker, not the Alpha. The King's Mate. The words settled into Nora like a stone dropping into still water. She put the teacup down very carefully. She's not wrong, her wolf said quietly. No sarcasm this time, just observation. I spent 17 years building a reputation that had nothing to do with anyone else, Nora said, her voice level. I could track a rogue wolf through a blizzard. I found the Ashburn Pack's missing children when every other tracker had given up. People said my name and they meant something specific. Nora Ironblood, the Iron Blood Tracker. She looked down at her hands. Now they say my name, and they mean his wife. Greta's hands stilled on the dough. He doesn't see it that way. I know he doesn't. That almost makes it worse. He thinks it's wonderful. He thinks being claimed is a gift. She laughed, a short, hollow sound. Maybe it is. But the claiming is going one direction, Greta. My scent is on everything he owns. His scent isn't on anything of mine. And do you know why? Greta shook her head. Because I won't let it. Because if I let his scent settle on me the way mine has settled on him, then I disappear. I become an extension of the king, and I don't know who I am if I'm not the thing I built. The kitchen was quiet. Greta went back to kneading. After a moment, she said, Maybe you're not the thing you built. Maybe you're the thing you're building. Nora didn't answer. Her wolf was silent for a long time. Then, she makes good bread and good points. Annoying combination. It was a week later that word came. Lord Aldrich Heron, Alpha King of the Granite Peak Territory, was coming. Marcus delivered the news with the expression of a man announcing a dental appointment. He's requested a formal summit. 3 days. The agenda is the White Bridge Pass. He wants shared access. Shared access to our pass, Sky said flatly. The pass that's been Silvermoon territory for 200 years. He's framing it as a mutual benefit. Open trade corridor, shared patrol costs. Marcus paused. He's also bringing his daughter, Lady Marguerite, 19, unmated. Sky looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the ceiling. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. He doesn't know about me, Nora said. He knows you exist, Marcus corrected. He knows Sky has mated an Iron Blood Alpha. But Heron is old school. Old school. To him, a female alpha is a curiosity. A mated pair of 2 alphas is an instability. He's coming to take the measure of this court, and he's expecting to find a young king distracted by a novelty. Charming, Nora said. Sky's jaw was tight. His hand, Nora noticed, had drifted to her chair again. His wolf pulling him closer. She could see the faint tension in his forearm, the man resisting the pull, trying to maintain composure. He didn't always manage it. Yesterday she'd caught him standing in the doorway of the library, watching her read, with no memory of having walked there. His wolf had just delivered him. We'll give him his summit, Sky said. 3 days, full diplomatic protocol. He looked at Nora, and she saw the question he wasn't asking. Can you hold it together? Can you keep the scent in check, keep the wolf quiet, keep the Iron Blood Tracker visible instead of the marking? She saw it, and it stung, because it was the same question she was asking herself. I'll handle it, she said. Will we, though? Her wolf asked. We will. Aldrich Heron arrived on a gray morning with a retinue of 40 wolves and the quiet confidence of a man who had never, in 6 decades of rule, been surprised by anything. He was tall, broad, silver-haired, with a scent like old leather and mountain pine that filled the courtyard with the understated authority of a wolf who had held territory longer than Sky had been alive. He dismounted, surveyed the castle, and smiled the way a man smiles at a restaurant where the food will probably be adequate. Nora watched from the steps beside Skye. She had spent the morning in a meditation she'd invented herself, not gentle contemplation, not the quiet arts, but a focused, deliberate compression of her scent signature. She'd pulled it tight, locked it down, banked it to the faintest possible whisper. The effort was like holding a door shut against a high wind, constant, exhausting, but it held. "This is uncomfortable," her wolf noted. "I know. I feel like I'm wearing a very tight hat, on my entire body." "I know. Just registering that for the record." Heron climbed the steps and clasped Skye's hand. "Young king, your father was a fine alpha. I see you've kept the place standing." He turned to Nora, and his eyes, sharp, assessing, took her in. The silver of her iron-blood eyes, the deliberate stillness of her posture. "And this must be the iron-blood bride," he said, inclining his head. "I've heard a great deal about you." "Queen, Nora," Skye corrected, his voice pleasant and absolutely firm. "Of course," Heron smiled. It was the smile of a man who had heard the correction and filed it under irrelevant. "Shall we?" The first day of the summit was an exercise in quiet condescension. Heron was not rude. He was never rude. He was simply, politely, completely uninterested in anything Nora said. When she offered an analysis of the trade corridor logistics, he listened, nodded, and then directed his response to Skye. When she corrected a factual error in his team's maps, the White Bridge Pass elevation was wrong by 40 feet, she could tell from the drainage patterns. He thanked her and moved on without adjusting the map. It was infuriating in the specific way that only politeness can be infuriating. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't call it out. It was just a wall of warm, smiling nothing. And through it all, Nora held. She kept her scent compressed, kept her wolf quiet, kept her composure immaculate. She was everything a queen should be, poised, strategic, controlled. The council members who had spent 6 weeks flinching from her territorial markers now looked at her with something like relief. The iron blood had finally settled. The surge was over. "It's not over," her wolf said, strained. "I'm just holding my breath. There's a difference." "I know. Just a little longer." He looked at Skye when you were talking about the drainage. You were right about the drainage. He knew you were right. He looked at Skye anyway. "I know. I don't like him. Neither do I. But we're not here to like him. We're here to secure the pass." Her wolf subsided, but the discomfort was real. The compression was costing them both something. Nora could feel it, a muffling, like a hand pressed over her ears. The world was slightly flatter, slightly grayer. Her sense of smell, normally a symphony, was a transistor radio turned low. She was trading her sharpest sense for the appearance of control. Skye noticed. Of course he did. That evening, after the first day's sessions had ended and the delegations had retired, he found her on the eastern battlement, staring out at the mountains. "You're quiet," he said, leaning on the wall beside her. Close, but not touching. His wolf had steered him here, she was certain of it, but the man was maintaining a careful distance, reading her mood. He was good at that, better than she gave him credit for. "I'm managing." "You're compressing your scent. I can barely smell you." She glanced at him. "I thought that was the point. No territorial incidents, no marked silverware. A calm, controlled queen who doesn't embarrass the crown." Something flickered across his face. It was fast. He covered it quickly, but she caught it. A flinch. Small. Involuntary. As if she'd said something that landed in a place he didn't want her to see. "Nobody's asking you to do that," he said quietly. "Everybody is asking me to do that. They've been asking since the day I got here. They just ask with their faces instead of their words." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I miss it." She frowned. "Miss what?" "Your scent." He said it simply, without drama, looking out at the mountains. The cedar, the rain. I know it was everywhere, and I know it was a problem, and I know the court thinks this is better. But the castle smells like stone now. It used to smell like you, and now it smells like stone. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to charm her or jolly her out of her mood. He was just saying a true thing, and it cost him something to say it. Because what he was really saying was, I miss being yours, and I'm afraid you don't miss being mine. Oh, her wolf said softly. Nora didn't answer him. She didn't know how. So they stood together on the battlement, close but not touching, the wind cold between them, and said nothing at all. The second day of the summit was worse. Heron brought his daughter, Lady Marguerite, to the morning session. She was beautiful, polished, and clearly terrified of being there. Heron seated her beside Skye, across from Nora, and the implication was so blatant it was almost admirable in its shamelessness. A visual reminder, here is a traditional arrangement. Here is what a court usually looks like. Marguerite, to her credit, looked mortified. She kept shooting apologetic glances at Nora, clearly aware she was being used as a prop. The girl didn't choose this, Nora's wolf observed. Don't punish the chess piece for the hand that moves it. I know. The session focused on the pass. Heron wanted joint control, shared patrol, shared maintenance, shared toll revenue. It sounded reasonable. It was designed to sound reasonable. But Nora could read the subtext the way she read a scent trail. Not the surface, but the direction underneath it. If the patrols are shared, she said, and patrol assignments are determined by mutual agreement, then neither party can unilaterally increase their presence in the pass, correct? Heron glanced at her, then at Skye. That is the intention. And the dispute resolution mechanism for patrol disagreements would be a joint council, equal representation. Equal representation between a territory of 9 packs and a territory of 3? Nora's voice was mild. That gives your wolves 3 times the per capita influence. A disagreement between 1 Granite Peak pack and 1 Silvermoon pack would be resolved by a council where your side has a structural majority. The room went still. Nora had just, in 2 sentences, identified the trap buried in 30 pages of diplomatic language. Heron's team had spent weeks constructing a framework that appeared fair but would give them functional control of the pass within a year. Heron's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time, and then he did something that was worse than dismissal. He smiled, warm, avuncular, patronizing. A sharp eye, he said. Your iron blood training serves you well. He turned to Skye. You found yourself a clever mate, Wolfblood. She'll keep you honest. It was a compliment that was actually a dismissal. He'd acknowledged her intelligence and immediately reframed it as a service to her husband. A tool in the king's toolbox. An asset, not an equal. Nora felt her wolf surge against the compression. A sharp, hot flare of cedar and petrichor that she barely managed to contain. The effort made her temples throb. Let me out, her wolf said, and for once there was no sarcasm, just urgency. He's wrong and he's smiling about it. Let me mark the table, let me mark the map. Let me mark his bloody chair. Let him smell who he's talking to. No, Nora, no. We do this with our mind, not our scent. That's who we are. Her wolf went quiet, but the quiet felt wrong, compressed, airless, like a room with the windows nailed shut. Skye was watching her. She could feel it without looking. His wolf had pulled him half a degree toward her in his chair. His thumb was tapping his knee, the nervous tell he didn't know he had. Perhaps, Skye said, his voice even, we should revisit the council structure. My queen has identified a significant imbalance. My queen. Heron repeated it thoughtfully, as if tasting the words. A bonded pair of alphas sharing a throne. It's a remarkable thing. A rare thing. He paused. The old texts call it unstable, of course, but I'm sure the old texts have been wrong before. He said it pleasantly. He said everything pleasantly. And the word, unstable, landed exactly where he'd aimed it. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to Sky breathe beside her, and felt the compression like a physical weight on her chest. Her wolf was still there. She could feel it. But it was muted, distant, as if she'd locked it in a room and the sound was coming through the walls. She'd been a tracker since she was 14. Her nose had been her compass, her weapon, her identity. When she walked through a forest, she didn't just smell the trees. She read the story of every creature that had passed through in the last week. She could tell you where a deer had paused to drink, where a fox had hesitated, where a wolf had turned back. The world spoke to her in scent, and she understood its language better than anyone alive. Now the language was garbled. She'd muted her own signal so thoroughly that the receiving end was damaged too. The world smelled like cotton, faint, flat, indistinct. She was the best nose in a generation, and she'd blinded herself. "You're hurting us," her wolf said from very far away. The voice was thin, tired. "I know you're afraid. I know you think I'm erasing you. But this silence, this is worse. I can't let it out. Not here. Not now." "Then when?" Nora didn't have an answer. The third day, the final session. The past negotiation had stalled on the council structure. Nora's objection had held, and Heron's team couldn't find a framework that gave them the advantage they wanted without making the imbalance obvious. It was good work, strategic, precise, effective, the kind of work that should have felt like a victory. It felt like nothing. Nora sat at the table, her scent locked down, her wolf barely audible, her senses flattened. She was performing control so perfectly that she'd become a performance. The court saw a poised queen. Heron saw a managed threat. Sky saw... She didn't know what Sky saw. He'd stopped trying to catch her eye. His hand no longer drifted toward hers. His wolf had finally gotten the message. She didn't want to be reached. "That's not what we wanted," her wolf whispered, barely there now. "We wanted control. We didn't want this." Heron spoke. The session was winding down, the final terms being drafted, the delegations preparing to sign. "A productive summit," he said, his voice warm. He looked at Sky and Nora, seated side by side in their matching thrones. "I confess, I had my doubts. An alpha-alpha bond? The history's worn against it. But I see that you've found your balance." He inclined his head toward Nora. "The iron blood fire is tempered. The bond is... settled." He said it as a compliment. He meant it as a confirmation. "You've tamed her. The wildness is managed. The instability has been contained." And Nora heard it, and something inside her agreed. Yes, the fire is tempered. The bond is settled. The iron blood tracker who used to read the world through scent now reads it through a fog. Because the alternative was too messy, too loud, too much. Her wolf didn't respond. Her wolf was so far away she could barely feel it. "The iron blood fire is tempered," her wolf repeated, from what felt like the bottom of a well. And then, very quietly, "Is it though? Or is it just out?" The silence after that was the emptiest thing Nora had ever felt. The delegation signed the amended treaty. Nora's structural objection had been resolved. The council framework was genuinely fair now, and Heron's retinue began packing to leave. It was over. They'd won the negotiation. Nora should have felt triumphant. She felt like a hollowed-out log. She walked the castle corridors after the signing, alone. The stone smelled like stone. The tapestries smelled like dust. The kitchen smelled like nothing. Or rather, like 100 things that she should have been able to separate and name, but that now blurred into a dull, indistinct hum. She passed the council chamber and paused. 6 weeks ago, this room had reeked of her. Charred cedar and petrichor in every grain of the wood, every thread of the velvet. An embarrassment. A spectacle. Now it smelled like old oak and tallow candles. Just a room. Just a room where decisions were made by people who sat in chairs that didn't smell like anyone in particular. She pressed her hand flat against the oak door and felt nothing. No tingle, no urge, no wolf reaching out to claim what was hers. Hello? She thought. Nothing. Are you there? The quietest voice from the furthest possible distance. I'm here. But you told me to stop. So I stopped. Nora's hand trembled against the door. You wanted control, her wolf said. You have it. This is what control feels like when there's nothing left to control. I didn't mean this. I know. Come back. I don't know how. You locked the door from your side. I can't reach it from mine. Nora stood in the corridor, her hand flat against the council chamber door, and felt the precise, devastating weight of getting exactly what she'd asked for. She found Sky in his study, doing paperwork. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. The face he wore when he was trying very hard not to want something. Heron's gone, he said. Marcus is seeing them off. Good. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. It was the chair she'd sat in 100 times. It used to smell like her, and then like both of them, and now like neither. I've broken something, she said. Sky put down his pen. He didn't ask what. He just waited, giving her the space that she was only now realizing she'd been misreading as distance. He wasn't backing away from her. He was making room, the same way he'd made room for her scent, her chaos, her territorial wolf. By stepping to the side and letting her fill the space without ever asking for his own. And she'd never once filled any of his. My wolf is gone, she said. Not gone. Quiet. So quiet I can barely hear her. I spent 6 weeks fighting the scent marking, and I won. And the winning was easy, actually. All I had to do was compress everything I am into a tight little package that doesn't bother anyone, doesn't smell like anything, doesn't take up any space. The perfect queen. Poised, controlled, empty. Her voice cracked on the last word. She hadn't expected that. The iron-blood alpha, the legendary tracker, the woman whose stillness could make other wolves look away. Her voice cracked. Sky got up from his desk. He came around to her side and knelt in front of her chair, not touching, just there. Close. His scent, warm stone, summer earth, reached her through the compression, faint but steady, like a candle in a fog. You're not empty, he said. I can't smell the kitchens, Sky. I walked past the kitchens, and I couldn't separate the bread from the stalk. I'm the best nose in a generation, and I can't smell bread. He flinched. This time he didn't hide it. Because you've been suppressing? Because I suppressed so hard and so long that the instrument is damaged. Temporarily, I think. I hope. But right now, the thing that made me is just flat. He sat back on his heels. She watched something work through him. Not just concern, but something older and more complicated. He ran a hand through his hair, and when he spoke, his voice was different, lower, rougher, stripped of the easy warmth he wore like armor. Can I tell you something that I've never said out loud? She nodded. I've been king since I was 22. My father died and the crown landed on my head, and every single person in my life rearranged themselves around it. Overnight. Friends became advisors, family became stakeholders, women became candidates. He looked at his hands. Everyone I've ever known has wanted something from the king. An alliance, a favor, a marriage that consolidates power. And I learned, very early, to stop looking for the person who wanted Sky. Because Sky without the crown isn't anyone wants. The room was very quiet, and then you arrived, and your wolf, this baffling, territorial, sardonic wolf of yours, started marking everything I touched. Not the throne, not the crown. Me. My chair, my pillow, my quill. The things that smell like me, not the things that smell like the king. He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright, and his voice was steady, but only just. You were the first person in my life whose wolf looked at me and thought, mine. Not the crown, the man. And I held on to that so hard because I have been waiting for it for so long that I didn't even know I was waiting. He reached for her hand, then stopped himself. his wolf doing the steering, the man overriding it. She could see the effort, the tiny war between what he wanted and what he thought she'd accept. "And now you've gone quiet," he said. "And the castle smells like stone. And your wolf isn't reaching for me anymore. And I know, you had to do it for the summit. And I know it was costing you. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be the man who needed too much from a woman who had too much to carry." His voice broke, just slightly, on the word needed. "But I do need too much. Need you. Need the cedar and the rain and the wolf that marks my things like they matter. And I'm telling you this now because you said you've broken something. And I think maybe I've broken something too, by never saying it. You can," she said softly. "You can touch me." He took her hand. His fingers were warm. His grip was careful and firm, and she felt the first faint crack in the compression. Not a flood, not a rush, just a hairline fracture in the wall she'd built. The crack widened. "Nora," her wolf said, "closer now. Still far, but closer. He means it. I know. He's been waiting for someone to claim him his entire life, and you've been terrified of claiming anything because you thought it meant losing yourself. And you're both idiots." Nora let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She's back," she said. "A little. She just called us both idiots." The relief that washed over Sky's face was so naked, so unguarded, that it broke something loose in her chest. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to their joined hands, and she felt his breath shudder. "Tell her she's right," he said, his voice muffled. "Obviously I'm right. I've been right this entire time. The scent marking was inelegant, I grant you, but the principle was sound. He needed to be claimed. We needed to claim. The methodology required refinement, not abandonment." Nora laughed, a real laugh, watery and ragged. "She says the methodology required refinement, not abandonment." Sky looked up, and he was smiling, and his eyes were wet, and his wolf had finally won because his hand was on her cheek now, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, and neither of them pretended it was an accident. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the king's study to find Nora's scent draped over Sky's desk like a tablecloth. Not the faint accidental residue of the surge, something warmer, softer, deliberate, like a signature on a letter. He stopped in the doorway, took a slow breath, and sighed the sigh of a man who had briefly, foolishly, believed the tomato juice era was behind him. "It's back," he said. "It's back," Sky confirmed, looking unreasonably happy about it. "Greta is going to make me sleep in the shed again. Buy her flowers, from me, with a note that says, 'Apologies for the cedar.'" Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. "Will there be anything else, Your Majesty?" "Actually, yes," Sky leaned back. "Nora has an idea about Heron." Marcus looked at the ceiling, at the scent-marked desk, at the king's radiantly besotted expression, and resigned himself to whatever was coming next. It was Nora who called Heron back, not to the castle, to the pass itself. The White Bridge, the corridor through the mountains that they'd spent 3 days negotiating over maps and frameworks and polite disagreements. "You signed the treaty from a table," she told Marcus. "He thinks he knows what he agreed to. He doesn't. He's never walked it." Marcus looked skeptical. "You want to walk the pass with the Granite Peak delegation?" "I want to show Aldrich Heron what the Ironblood Tracker actually does. Not in a council chamber. On the ground." Marcus looked at Sky. Sky, whose hand had migrated to the back of Nora's chair, approximately 40 seconds after she'd sat down, said, "Send the invitation." Heron accepted, because refusing would have been a concession, and Heron didn't make concessions. He arrived at the White Bridge with a small party, his expression one of polite curiosity, as if he'd been invited to observe a mildly interesting local tradition. The pass was a narrow corridor between 2 massive granite walls, the rock dark with lichen, the ground a treacherous mix of loose scree and old ice. The wind channeled through it like a blade. Nora walked ahead, not beside Sky, not behind Heron. Ahead. Alone. She had spent the night before the walk carefully, gently, reopening what she had compressed. Not all at once, not a flood. A gradual release, like unclenching a fist one finger at a time. Her wolf had helped, patiently, carefully, with none of its usual sardonic commentary, coaxing the damaged senses back like warming frozen hands. Slowly, her wolf had said, the world is still there. Let it come back at its own pace. Now, on the pass, her nose opened like a flower. She could smell the rock, the iron in it, the age. She could smell the ice, not just cold, but the specific mineral signature of meltwater from the eastern glacier. She could smell the delegation behind her, Heron's old leather, Sky's warm stone, Marcus's perpetual anxiety. She could smell a hare that had crossed the path 2 days ago, and a hawk that had killed it, and the precise spot where the blood had soaked into the scree. The world, after weeks of cotton silence, was a symphony again. The disputed section starts here, she said, stopping at a point where the pass narrowed to 30 feet. Your maps place the boundary line at the rock fall. She pointed to a jumble of boulders ahead. It's wrong. Heron raised an eyebrow. Our surveyors are quite thorough. Your surveyors used visual landmarks. Landmarks move. She crouched, pressing her fingers to the ground. I can smell the boundary. The Silver Moon Patrol has been running this line for 60 years. Their scent is in the stone itself, not the surface, the stone. Mineral absorption. It doesn't lie, and it doesn't move. She stood and walked to a point 20 feet west of the rockfall. The actual boundary is here. Your patrols have been crossing it by 20 feet for the last 2 seasons. Not an invasion. The rockfall shifted. Your wolves followed the visual marker, and the visual marker moved. An honest mistake. She looked at Heron. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not patronizing, not dismissive, recalculating. You can smell a 60-year-old patrol line in the rock, he said. It was not a question. I can smell a 200-year-old one. The original Silver Moon claim runs deeper than any survey your team has done. I can walk the entire pass and show you exactly where every boundary sits, to the inch. No maps, no markers, just the ground itself telling the truth. The wind howled through the pass. Heron looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at Sky, who was standing behind Nora with his arms folded and an expression of undisguised pride. You said I'd found a clever mate, Sky said, his voice carrying over the wind. I found a partner. There's a difference. Heron was quiet for a time. Then he inclined his head, not the polite nod of a man acknowledging a novelty, but the deeper gesture of a wolf recognizing a genuine threat he had failed to assess. Walk the pass, he said to Nora. Show me the lines. She walked. She showed him. Every boundary, every layer, every truth written in stone and scent and 60 years of footsteps. She was the Iron Blood tracker, and the mountain pass was an open book. And Aldrich Heron watched a woman read it in a language he couldn't speak, and understood finally that this was not a court curiosity. This was power. And on the rock walls of the White Bridge Pass, where the wind was too strong and the stone too old for any mark to hold, on the one surface in the kingdom she could never have claimed by accident, a faint, deliberate trace of charred cedar and petrichor settled into the granite. Didn't mean to do that, her wolf said. Yes, you did. Yes, I did. A pause. That one was on purpose. That one was us. They rode back in the late afternoon, the light gold and slanting. Heron had been quiet since the pass, but it was a different quiet. The silence of a man revising a very old assumption. At the castle gates, he clasped Sky's hand and then turned to Nora. Queen Nora, he said. Her name and title, together, without irony or condescension. I've held my territory for 60 years, and no one has ever shown me my own borders from the ground. He paused. The old texts call an alpha-alpha bond unstable. The old texts, I think, are wrong. He mounted and rode out. Nora watched him go. He'll respect the boundary now, her wolf observed. Not because of the treaty, because he knows I can tell if he doesn't. That evening, Nora sat with Skye on the eastern battlement. The same spot where he'd told her he missed her scent. The same cold wind. But the silence between them was different now, full instead of empty. "I owe you an apology," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For treating the bond like a threat. For acting like being yours meant losing me." She was quiet for a moment, finding the right words. "Greta told me the court calls me the king's mate, and I hated it. I thought it meant I'd been erased. But the truth is, you've been the tracker's mate this entire time, and you never once complained about it." He laughed softly. "I like being the tracker's mate." "I know you do. That's the part I didn't understand." She turned to face him. "You weren't asking me to be less. You were asking me to let you be close. And I was so busy protecting who I used to be that I couldn't see who we could be together." He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her on the battlement before. Open, unguarded, wanting. But this time she didn't turn away from it. "I'm going to mark your pillow tonight," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Your pillow. I'm going to scent mark it. Deliberately. Not a surge, not a compulsion, not my wolf losing control. Me. Choosing." A slow grin spread across his face. "Any particular reason?" "Because it's mine. Because you're mine. And because I've decided that claiming something doesn't mean losing yourself. It means choosing what you keep." His wolf had steered him close again, shoulder to shoulder, then closer, his arm behind her back, his nose drifting to her hair. He didn't pretend it was an accident. Neither did she. "For the record," her wolf said, dry as ever, "I've always known this. I've been trying to tell you for 6 weeks. You're welcome." Noted, Nora thought, and overruled on the smugness. You can't overrule smugness. Smugness is a natural right. That night, Nora scent marked the pillow. Not a tingle, not a whisper, not a residual accident. A full, deliberate, luxurious layer of charred cedar and petrichor sunk deep into the linen. Skye was watching her from the doorway, his shoulder against the frame, his arms folded. He hadn't walked in yet. His wolf was pulling him. She could see it in the tension of his stance, the slight lean forward. But the man was savoring the moment. Watching her claim something of his with her eyes open and her hands steady. "You're staring," she said. "I'm admiring," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Your wolf steered you to the doorway, didn't it?" "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm here of my own volition." A pause. "I was in the library, which is on the other side of the castle. I don't know why I'm here." She laughed. "Come to bed, Skye." He crossed the room, lay down, pressed his face into the pillow, and breathed deep. The sound he made was quiet, private, and so genuinely happy that Nora felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. "Charred cedar and petrichor," he murmured, his voice muffled by the pillow. "The best smell in the world. Better than warm stone and summer earth?" He lifted his head, and the look on his face, soft, open, unguarded, was the look of a man who had finally, after a very long time, come home. Together? Yes. Together is better. "Acceptable," her wolf said, curling up somewhere warm and deep and no longer quite so far away. Though the water pitcher could use a refresh. Tomorrow. And his study chair, that's faded badly. Tomorrow. And possibly the council chamber. For old time's sake. Go to sleep. Fine, but I'm making a list. The kingdom was safe. The pass was secured. The tracker's nose was her own again, sharper than ever, aimed exactly where she chose. And in the quiet of the royal chambers, the alpha king of the Silver Moon Pax slept on a pillow that smelled like charred cedar and petrichor. And the woman beside him, the iron-blood tracker, the queen, the wolf who had learned that strength was not the same as silence, slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Her wolf, dry and sardonic and slightly pleased with itself, slept too. It had a list to get to in the morning.